depression, one of the core features is hopelessness, a sense of hopelessness, yes? What are depressed people hopeless about? Well, they're hopeless about a lot of things, but one of the things they're hopeless about is ever getting better. Ever getting out of depression. They're depressed about their own depression. I'm sure you've noticed this in your clinical practice. So anything, I can't imagine a treatment for depression being effective unless you can alleviate that sense of hopelessness. And what is placebo supposed to do? The promise of effective treatment? It's supposed to instill hopefulness. So it seemed to me that there ought to be a good-sized placebo effect that you can find in depression. And since I'm interested in studying placebo, this would be a good place to look for it. I assume there would also be a good-sized drug effect. I mean, this was a revolutionary new treatment for depression. Well, not that new already, but the revolutionary, that's a treatment that has revolutionized certainly the treatment of depression. I assumed it was effective. I was a psychotherapist then. If I had a patient that was very depressed, I would refer him or her to a medical colleague for a prescription of antidepressants. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. If it worked, I assumed it was the effect of the drug, just like everybody else did. But here I am, I want to study the placebo effect, and I have to compare it to something. You can't just study the response to placebo, it doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you anything for the same thing that just studying the response to an active drug doesn't tell you anything. The response to the active drug may, in some or all part, be due to the placebo effect. I can give you, if you have a cold, I'll give you a placebo, I promise you, you'll get better. And if I don't give you the placebo, you'll get better. You have to have some control for natural history and no treatment control to know what the placebo effect is. So we went to the literature and we searched for clinical trials where depressed patients had been randomized to either get a placebo, to be treated with placebo, or to be given no treatment at all, followed up in a waitlist control group, something like this. Where are we going to find? Where did we find patients who had been given placebo? In drug trials. That's the only place that you find placebo responses in depressed patients. That means that we had the drug data. Weren't particularly interested in it, but we had it. We're analyzing it just like the people with the cloffibrate when they're analyzing adherence. So then they looked at adherence in the placebo condition. We looked at the response in the drug condition as well. And so what we're looking here now is changes in depression from before treatment to after you've gotten treatment for whatever the length of the trial is. And these numbers are what are called effect sizes, standardized mean differences. You don't have to worry about that. We found a nice, large pre to post effect size for antidepressants. There's no doubt that people taking antidepressants show, not all of them, but on average, show a good clinically meaningful response. The problem is that people being given placebos also show a good, large, clinically meaningful response, whereas those in the no treatment condition show a very small response. This is very important, by the way, besides this difference. Here's what we have. 25% of the response to the active drug would have occurred with no treatment at all, not even placebo treatment. Another 50% was the placebo effect. That's over and above no treatment. This is very important. People still say, when I'm talking about it, when I'm writing, they say it in print, they say it in person, they say it in interviews. Oh, this is not a real placebo effect. You know, you measure somebody, you put them into a clinical trial for one reason or another, they just get better even if you didn't give them a placebo. It's not true. It's just not true. If you don't give them treatment, they do not improve much. They have to be given treatment. Being put on a waiting list does not work. The placebo does, but here was the surprise. At that time, it's no longer a surprise. At that time, for me, it was a big surprise. That left only 25% of the response to the antidepressant medication as a true drug effect. We published that in 1998. And the reaction was, it can't be true. One person has written, clinical practice plus millions of content patients can't be that wrong. Antidepressants work. Everybody knows they work. History of medicine should lead to some caution in that here are other treatments that have worked for millions of content patients and that everyone knew worked. That's why we do clinical trials. The interesting thing, by the way, is that the other position that I put in now is people say you haven't proved that the drug doesn't work. As if I have to prove that, they have to prove that the drug works in good, well-done clinical trials. Or otherwise we should go back to do it. No one has proved that these don't work. Because there haven't been any clinical trials on bloodletting, lizard blood, crocodile dung, or any of the others. Anyway, we published it. It was very controversial. And the question is how to follow up on this controversy since many people just didn't believe it. I got an email from someone I had never met before. His name is Tom Moore. He was at George Washington University. And he wrote to me and he said, Professor Kirsch, I found your meta-analysis with Guy Saperstein very interesting. I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember the exact word, but it's pretty much it. Found it very interesting, noticed a big debate about it. I have a suggestion for you in terms of resolving this debate. Why don't you see if you can replicate your own study with a different data set? And I have a suggestion as to what data set to use. Use the Freedom of Information Act. Get the data that the drug companies send to the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, in the process of gaining approval for their antidepressant medications. See what happens. I thought about that. I wrote him back and I said, Dr. Moore, this is actually Mr. Moore's not, Mr. Moore, this is a very interesting suggestion. I think it's a great idea. Let's do it together. So he went to the FDA, he invoked the Freedom of Information Act, and he got from them the statistical reviews and data from the clinical approvals of what at that time were the 6 most widely prescribed antidepressants. Copied them, sent them to me. He worked on them in Washington. I worked on them at the University of Connecticut, where I was at the time. Now, the FDA data have a number of advantages over other data sets. One is the fact that the FDA does its own quality review. This is one of the big problems in meta-analysis. You put in a bunch of studies. Some of them are well-done studies, some of them aren't. There are ways of dealing with that. You try to rate the quality of the studies. It's a big job. The FDA rated the quality of the studies, and the studies we analyzed consisted of all of what the FDA called adequate and well-controlled studies. And you may notice that on this slide I underline the word all. Because, as it turns out, we didn't notice at the time, but we now know, that 40% of the clinical trials of antidepressants sponsored by the pharmaceutical industry have not been published. The data has just been withheld. I'm sorry? the data have just been withheld. They have sent it to the FDA, but they've never published it. And in fact, most people don't even know, most physicians didn't even know that these data existed because the FDA, in its great wisdom, decided that it was not important for patients, third-party payers, or prescribing physicians to know that there were many studies that did not find significant benefits. They thought it was irrelevant. That's still their policy, except that I am told by the producer of 60 Minutes that an FDA spokesman who's also being interviewed in this show has gone on camera. I don't know whether they've kept it in or not, but he told me that he's gone on camera saying that from now on they are going to mention in the labeling that there have been unsuccessful trials. So we'll see what happens.
30% about the real
40% are not published. Now the question is,
new drugs or old drugs existing on the market?
both.
Both.
This is across, we're talking about the Prozac. We're talking, the newest approved antidepressant in the U.S. is Placebo, is the generic name. They had 7 clinical trials, 2 of which found a significant difference between drug and placebo, 5 of which did not find any significant difference at all. And then where you had a significant difference, the difference was about 1 point. About 1 point. 1 point on the Hamilton depression. It has the worst data, worst efficacy data of all the antidepressants. It makes a difference. Previous meta-analyses were limited to the published data, most of them. If you look at the published data, 75%, 76% of the clinical trials show a significant difference between drug and placebo for antidepressants. If you look at the unpublished data, almost all of them fail. These are, what don't they publish? They don't publish the trials that have negative results. So what we did was a very simple thing. We had all of the data. We analyzed all of the data together, regardless of whether they had been published or not. In fact, at the time we did the analysis, we didn't know which had been published and which not. We now know, but it was a hard time finding out. Not easy to find out. We had another advantage. In the analysis of published studies, some use the Hamilton, some use that depression inventory. They use different scales of measures of depression. And so we calculated these effect sizes. The FDA required all of the drug companies to use the Hamilton depression inventory. So we now have scores for the placebo and the drug condition, pre and post, on the same scale, and it's a scale where we could then interpret the clinical significance of the differences. Here's what we found in 2002. When you include both the published and unpublished studies, that's where you get the 82% figure that I showed you earlier. 82% of the response to the drug is accounted for by the response to placebo, leaving a true drug effect, if there is one, of less than 20%. More important, the average difference between drug and placebo was less than 2 points. It was 1.8 points on the Hamilton depression scale. And to make sense of that, what you should know is that the National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence, which is the official body in the United Kingdom that establishes treatment guidelines for the National Health Service, has in 2004 set a criterion for clinical significance of a difference between drug and placebo, and their criterion is 3 points.